we've in mid-April from the National Toxicology Program of the National Institutes of Health that there is, quote, some concern about neural and behavioral effects of BPA on fetuses, infants, and children. In response to this, Senator Schumer and I introduced the BPA-Free Kids Act of 2008, which prohibit the use. But again, we've been slow to sort of take this up. In fact, the response from the recent study of the FDA of the National Toxicology Program has simply promised more studies, not any concrete action to reduce exposure. The media has reported that the federal government's reluctance to regulate these chemicals is based on the reliance of biased studies from the chemical industry itself. Now, I have to tell you, if that's true, if it's not being done independently or by yourselves, but by an industry study, doesn't that cast amazing doubt on the ability of the regulatory system to actually protect the public?
Senator, at FDA, all of our products that we approve are based on data that are prepared and conducted in studies by that particular manufacturer.
But doesn't that bother you? That's my point. You don't seem to see the connection here. Let me read. My wife and I did a book. I'm not here to hawk a book, but we wrote a book, and a chapter in it is on this topic. Let me just read something about baby food. Chemicals that go into the manufacture of other products intended for young children, polyvinyl chloride softens because of the existence of phthalates. It's still used in the manufacture of children's toys, bath books, rattles, beach balls, plastic raincoats, boots, even teething rings. And it can be absorbed from those products during use into a young child's body. The fact is that a biomonitoring study coordinated by EWG, the Environmental Working Group, tested the umbilical cord blood from 10 babies who'd been born in the United States in August and September of 2004. These newborns were found to have absorbed in the womb a combined total of 413 chemicals. At birth, each child carried an average body burden of 200 chemicals. And those chemicals included pesticides, flame retardants, and other persistent organic compounds or byproducts from burning gasoline and garbage. The EWG also tested the breast milk of 29 first-time mothers from across the United States for the presence of components of chemical flame retardants, TVs, foam furniture, all of which can cause thyroid toxicity, and some of which have been banned in Europe. And the results were very sobering. The breast milk of each new mother tested positive for components of flame retardants. The average level of brominated fire retardants in the milk samples was 75 times higher than the average for women who'd been tested in Europe and were at levels associated with toxic effects in studies on lab animals. I mean, you can go on and on about what is happening with phthalates themselves. There were some doctors who were doing an analysis, I think it was in Pittsburgh at the university, and they were trying to figure out what the impact was of plasticizers, phthalates, on creation of cancer. And before they even put the cancerous carcinogen into their experiment, they found that their base product had already turned cancerous, and they couldn't figure out why. So they started doing reverse analysis to figure out what had happened, and then they got to the point where they actually made telephone calls to the makers of the plastic tubes to find out what the ingredients were, and indeed found that the phthalates within the tubes themselves were the only rationale for what had created the carcinogenic transformation. Do you read these studies? Do they not concern you?
Sir, we've read all the studies you're talking about.
Well, why don't you ban phthalates? There's a movement in California to ban them now. There's a movement in Europe, other places. There's a lot of study in rats and others. Are you familiar with those studies that show that?
I personally am not, but I'm sure the scientists at FDA who review these materials every day are.
Well, does the commission not talk about this? Do you commissioners not talk about this?
We talk about these issues on a regular basis, Senator.
team at Boston Tufts University, led by Professor Soto, studied the effects of phthalate exposure in rats. They exposed pregnant rats to bisphenol A, BPA chemical, and the levels to which the rats were exposed mirrored levels that humans encounter daily. The results, by the time they reached puberty, rats that had been received even the lowest doses of BPA had 4 times more precancerous growths in breast tissue than those that had not been exposed. Think it's okay for people to go ahead and use this stuff? I mean, doesn't this concern you?
Senator, it does concern us.
Well, how much does it concern you? Enough that all you do is just rely on what a study that comes from the industry itself? You should go to their website today and read what they say about phthalates, completely contrary to what is out there in scientific journals. It's a disgrace. And it obviously doesn't concern you enough to do something about it. There are thousands upon thousands of chemicals. 80,000 chemicals are out there in the marketplace today. Something like less than 6,000 have been properly vetted and tested. And we're still living with the residue of the Toxic Controlled Substances Act that was written by the industry, with a burden of proof on our citizens to prove harm done, not on people to prove that it won't be done. And I tell you, I mean, I could go on and on. I've used my time here, and it's not appropriate to abuse it. But I just think the job is not being done, sir. I have to tell you. And I don't think the American public is being adequately protected. And I think we're going to have to find, this law has got to be rewritten. And we've got to start to do what we're supposed to do, not what the industry always asks us to do. You have any response? None. Think everything's okay?
Senator, as studies become available to us, we at FDA apply
studies from whom become available
whoever,
to you?
if they've been...
No, the only studies you're getting right now, have you asked for studies from independent sources?
We don't normally ask for independence.
Then you don't protect the American people if you don't ask for them, if you don't look beyond what's handed to you.
Thank you. Okay, that'll be all for this panel here. I want to thank you all for being here and providing your testimony. And just to let you all know, it's very possible that senators will have written questions, and they'll submit those for the record, and we'll keep the record open for 2 weeks to allow senators to submit their questions and you all to get your answers back. Now I'd like to introduce the third panel. Y'all just come on up and grab a microphone and grab your seats. First is going to be Dr. John Peterson Myers, CEO and Chief Scientist, Environmental Health Services. Next will be Ms. Elizabeth Hitchcock, Public Health Advocate for U.S. PIRG. And third will be Dr. Steve Hentges, Senior Director, Polycarbonate BPA Global Group, American Chemistry Council. So as you all are getting situated and finding your seats, I want to welcome all of you to the subcommittee and Dr. Myers.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, my name is Pete Myers. I'm the Chief Scientist of Environmental Health Sciences, a not-for-profit scientific organization based in Charlottesville, Virginia. And it's an honor to be here today and to participate in this discussion. I'm going to focus most of my comments on some of the issues that were raised by your questions earlier, specifically this whole high-dose versus low-dose issue, because it turns out that the structure, the basic way that the FDA, the EPA, and the CPSC have gone about asking scientific questions to respond to Senator Kerry's concerns are based upon 16th century science, not upon 21st century medicine. And that has left us blind to exactly the types of effects that bisphenol A and the phthalates now are shown to have caused in a wide array of experiments. I'll get to that. I first want to begin with a couple of preliminary comments. as Senator Kerry knows, over 10 years ago, I actually co-authored a book about endocrine disruption that brought this issue to the attention of the American public and policymakers for the first time. Even then, over 10 years ago, there were hints of risks from bisphenol A and phthalates. As I look at the last 10 years, the book's most important effect actually was to stimulate federal investments in medical and scientific research on endocrine disruption. And today, 10 years later, we are living midstream in a scientific revolution that has resulted from those investments. And it's truly quite amazing. It is changing the framework we use to think about how contaminants can be toxic. Because the old toxicology focused on overt damage, overt toxicity. Are mutations caused? Is the liver? Is there overt liver toxicity, et cetera? This new toxicology instead looks at molecular genetics, and it acknowledges that our genes actually are being turned on and off trillions of times a second every day of our life, every second of our life. And things like phthalates and bisphenol A affect that process of turning genes on and off. The FDA and EPA and the CDCs, their science currently ignores molecular genetics. It looks at old-style toxicology, the consequences of high doses. But we're learning that this new toxicology that builds upon the last several decades of molecular genetic research, is really revealing that the changes in gene expression that can be induced through low-level exposures in the womb then can lead the developing organism along a path that it never would have followed through adulthood, and induce diseases in adulthood that are actually traced to what are called epigenetic changes caused by low-level exposures in the womb. That's the central issue here. We've got to move from 16th century science to 21st century science. If you leave this room with not one new piece of information, here it is. Numerous animal studies published in the peer-reviewed literature show that the average person in America today has levels of bisphenol A in their blood that are higher than those sufficient to cause harm in animals. This is not a case of high-dose experiments being extrapolated to the consequences of low-dose exposure. These are experiments using low doses, asking what happens when animals are exposed to the levels that people experience. And crucially, the mechanisms of action of these low-dose exposures are identical. They're exactly the same in animals as they are in people. So the results of those experiments are highly relevant to predicting human effects. Lastly, and again about bisphenol A, I want you to focus on another fact that has been published in the peer-reviewed literature. Of the studies of bisphenol A that were funded by government sources, including the National Institute of Health, over 90% of them find adverse effects on animals. In contrast, none of the studies funded by industry report adverse effects. This is the same pattern, the very same pattern you will find with industry-funded studies of the effects of lead, pharmaceuticals, other chemicals, and tobacco. Now, some of you will recall the testimony in 1994 before Congress of the 7 heads of tobacco companies who swore that there was no link between cigarette smoking and cancer. As you listen to industry interpretation of the data on bisphenol A and phthalates, I would encourage you to think about that. I would also encourage you to take a look at this new book by Dr. David Michaels of George Washington University. It describes in detail, it's called Doubt is Their Product. It describes in detail how industry trade groups manipulate science to forestall action, regulatory action. Every delay keeps sales going and revenue flowing. But back to this larger issue of the contrast between high doses and low doses, I want to give you one specific example which really brings this home. And it's actually about a drug called tamoxifen. Now, tamoxifen, as many of you know, is used to fight breast cancer. At high levels, it suppresses the rate of growth of a breast tumor. It's very good at parts per million, parts per thousand levels. And physicians take great advantage of that. But if you go down the dose response curve to a level that's literally a million of times beneath the level where it's effective as a drug stopping breast cancer, it stimulates proliferation of the breast tumor. It's an estrogen at that level. The high-dose experiments that our regulatory agencies have depended upon to anticipate low-dose effects, they don't work when you're dealing with compounds that behave like hormones. This is a widely accepted fact in medical endocrinology. It's just not challenging at all. The question is, when are we going to bring the toxicological community into the 21st century of science? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Myers. Ms. Hitchcock.
Good morning, members of the committee. I'm Liz Hitchcock, public health advocate for the U.S. Public Interest Research Group. I've submitted longer written testimony for the record, but I'd like to cover 3 important points in this hearing. 1, the hazards of bisphenol A and phthalates are well documented and pose a special danger to children. 2, other countries, a number of states, and retailers are acting in the absence of federal action on these chemicals. 3, the federal government should regulate these and other toxic chemicals to protect our children's health. To begin, we'd like to commend the committee for its efforts to improve U.S. product safety, including the recent Senate passage of the CPSC Reform Act. When reconciled with the House bill, it will take long overdue steps forward in protecting America's children from unsafe products. We encourage the conference committee to take the strongest parts of each bill. In particular, we believe that the Senate bill's provisions addressing the toxic hazards of lead and phthalates in children's products are important steps to take preventable hazards out of the marketplace. First, the hazards of bisphenol A and phthalates are well documented, as Dr. Myers and others have told you in their testimony. For 22 years, U.S. PIRG's Trouble in Toyland safety reports have identified hazards to a population that is notorious for putting everything in their mouths, small children. We've increased our focus in the last 10 years on chronic hazards posed by unnecessary exposure to lead, phthalates, and chemicals known to be toxic. In 1998, we joined a number of public interest groups in petitioning the CPSC to ban polyvinyl chloride in all toys intended for children under the age of 5 because of the potential health hazards posed by phthalates. In 2003, the CPSC denied our petition. Phthalates are widely used and can be found in many children's products, including teethers, bath books, raincoats, and, as Senator Klobuchar pointed out, rubber duckies. Last year, U.S. PIRG's partner organization, Environment California, tested 5 of the most popular baby bottle brands on the market. Our researchers found that the bottles tested from all 5 brands leached bisphenol A at levels found to cause harm in numerous laboratory studies. Scientists have linked very low doses of bisphenol A to cancers, to impaired immune function, to the early onset of puberty, obesity, diabetes, and hyperactivity, among other problems. Phthalates have been linked to a number of serious health impacts, including reproductive defects, birth deformities, liver and thyroid damage, neurological impacts, and even cancer. In April, the National Toxicology Program at NIH finally acknowledged health concerns about children's exposure to BPA. Given the significant health concerns associated with both bisphenol A and with phthalates, taking a precautionary approach toward the use of these chemicals just makes sense. In other words, if there's evidence that these chemicals cause harm, and if we have safer alternatives with which to replace them, then why wouldn't we use precaution and restrict their use? Second, other countries in a number of states and some manufacturers are leading the way in taking action on these chemicals. For example, the European Union has had a policy restricting the use of phthalates since 1999. At least 14 countries have also restricted the use of phthalates to protect children's health. In the United States, only California and Washington State have enacted phthalate legislation. A Vermont bill is on the governor's desk right now. But at least a dozen states have either introduced or are considering introducing legislation to restrict phthalate use. In the private sector, several leading manufacturers of toys and baby products in the U.S. have stopped using phthalates over the last few years. In addition, Walmart and Toys R Us announced early this year that they'll begin phasing out children's toys containing the chemical in the coming months. Last month, the Canadian government declared bisphenol A toxic under Canadian law, triggering a ban on baby bottles with that chemical. There are current efforts in 5 state legislatures to restrict uses of BPA. Senator Chuck Schumer has introduced S. 2928, banning BPA in all products intended for infants and children up to age 7, a bill that U.S. PIRG supports. Consumers cannot be expected to do it alone and can't expect all industry and retailers to take the right voluntary steps. The federal government should regulate these and other toxic chemicals to protect our children's health. First, the federal government should take action based on the overwhelming weight of evidence showing that chemicals like phthalates and bisphenol A may harm human health. U.S. chemicals policy should be reformed to require manufacturers to provide all hazard and health impact information to the federal government so we can begin to assess the thousands of chemicals currently on the market for which we have little or inadequate data. And finally, the Conference Committee and the Congress should pass a final version of the CPSC reform bill that includes the Feinstein Amendment banning phthalates in children's products. The amendment will serve to significantly curb children's routes of exposure to these reproductive toxicants. We commend the committee for conducting this important hearing, and we hope that you find our comments helpful. We'd be happy to discuss other possible actions under the committee's jurisdiction to protect consumers from chronic and developmental hazards from unnecessary exposure to toxic chemicals in consumer products. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hitchcock. Senator Kerry has to leave, and he just say a few words.
I just wanted to thank the panel very much. I apologize that I can't be here. I particularly want to thank Pete Myers, Dr. Myers, and Diane Dubanowski and company for Our Stolen Future. Just a superb piece of work, which I wish more Americans were aware of. And Ms. Hitchcock, thank you for your testimony now. I will submit some questions in writing if that's permissible, a fair number, but very much appreciate your testimony today. I apologize, we just have competing hearings, and I'm sorry.
Senator. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Dr. Henches.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar and members of the committee. The American Chemistry Council appreciates the opportunity to testify today, and we also appreciate your interest in understanding the safety of plastics additives in consumer products. We've also provided written testimony, and I ask that the written testimony be entered into the record. We firmly believe that good public health policy must be based on facts and the best available science, and consumers should expect no less. Therefore, we are committed to the safety of our products, and last year alone, ACC member companies invested over $14 billion in environment, health, and safety programs, helping to improve the understanding of our products. As you know, much of the information on chemical safety can be highly technical and difficult for consumers to put into perspective. That's why it is essential for scientific review processes to be thorough and transparent in order for the public to have confidence in assessments conducted by government experts. Recent press reports have questioned the safety of phthalate esters and bisphenol A, compounds that are used in plastics to impart particular performance properties. Many of these reports have been misleading or inaccurate and have resulted in widespread confusion about the safety of plastics. In fact, both bisphenol A and phthalates have been subjected to numerous rigorous and comprehensive reviews by government agencies in the U.S. and around the world. After more than 5 decades of use, no reliable evidence has shown bisphenol A or phthalates in consumer products to have caused any harm to any person. To the contrary, recent government reviews have affirmed the safety of bisphenol A and phthalates in common everyday products. The clear weight of scientific evidence provides reassurance that the public should not be concerned about everyday products that contain either bisphenol A or phthalates. Phthalates are used to soften or plasticize otherwise rigid PVC plastic, which is used to make many consumer products. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, the National Toxicology Program, and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have found no justification for restricting the use of phthalates as a plasticizer in toys and children's products. The CPSC conducted a 5-year health risk study and found no demonstrated health risk from the primary phthalate used in PVC toys or other products intended for children 5 years of age and younger, and no justification for banning its use. International scientific agencies have come to similar conclusions. The European Union conducted a decade-long risk assessment of 5 phthalates and concluded that the primary phthalate used in children's toys was unlikely to pose a risk to consumers following inhalation, skin contact, or ingestion. In short, rigorous scientific reviews conducted by the government agencies responsible for regulating phthalates in consumer products do not support restrictions on the use of these materials. The science is simply not there to support such action. Bisphenol A is used primarily to make clear, shatter-resistant polycarbonate plastic and durable epoxy resins, both used in a wide array of consumer products. In the past 2 years alone, comprehensive scientific assessments from the European Union, the U.S. National Toxicology Program, Health Canada, NSF International, and the European Food Safety Authority have all been undertaken, and these assessments support the continued safe use of consumer products made from polycarbonate plastic and epoxy resins. Very recently, the FDA said, "We believe there is a large body of evidence that indicates that FDA-regulated products containing BPA currently on the market are safe, and that exposure levels to BPA from food contact materials, including for infants and children, are below those that may cause health effects." Based on the science, bisphenol A is not banned or restricted anywhere in the world, although it has been claimed that low doses of bisphenol A may be harmful. The so-called low-dose hypothesis is just that, a hypothesis that has not been proven and has not been accepted by any of the government agencies that have reviewed the science on bisphenol A. We understand that the public wants to be assured that the products they use are safe and have been evaluated using the best available science. We agree. In the case of phthalates and bisphenol A, consumers can confidently rely on rich bodies of safety data and the comprehensive assessments from experts in the U.S. and around the world. Thank you again for the opportunity to address the committee.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Henches, and to all the witnesses. Dr. Myers, your research seems to point to the fact that we have a long way to go before finding out the full effect of certain phthalates in PVC plastic or BPA in our food and beverage containers. Are there any studies that you know of that are looking into the low dosage exposure to which you referred in your opening statement?
Yes, there are studies underway, both experimental with animals and epidemiological studies of people. There's a center at the University of Rochester that is leading the way in both looking at the effects of exposure to individual phthalates as well as mixtures of phthalates and bisphenol A. It's a very interesting cutting-edge area of science right now. Additionally, there are efforts underway in California with the University of with Stanford University and the University of Missouri also, looking at a prediction that arises out of some very interesting science on bisphenol A, that there should be an association between low levels of bisphenol A and an increase in the rate of spontaneous miscarriage in people. That study is now funded, and we're anxiously awaiting for the results.
You mentioned that study. Was that the Center for the Disease Control that showed this high amount of additives in individuals tested? Was that